my talk. My name is Alan Minsk, and this has my email on it in case anyone needs to contact me afterwards. So what I'm going to be discussing really is the value and the way to develop and implement an effective patent strategy. Some of what I'll discuss are the motivations for that and some of the risks if you don't, as well as the elements or features of an effective strategy and how you can go about implementing them. This is a little bit of background on myself. I have over 25 years experience working as a patent attorney and strategist. I've worked both in-house and in law firms for a variety of companies, private, public, research institutions, VCs, incubators. With regards to AI and big data, I should mention that I do the patent work for the Allen Institute for AI, and I wrote the initial patent applications for YOLO, XNOR, and ELMO. So I have experience with a wide variety of business models and also with a variety of technologies. I work a lot with startups to help them develop their patent strategy, but I also work with established companies. I've served as the chief patent counsel for both private and publicly traded companies. So let me start with a little bit of background on patents. This is just to set the context for why some of what I say later may be of interest. So patents are a form of converting a solution to a technical problem or an idea into a business asset. The way they do that is by converting that solution into something that can be used both offensively and defensively. It can protect corporate value. It can also increase corporate value. So it's important when dealing with a patent attorney that they're able to get the information from you to assist them in making some of the decisions about what the potentially patentable features are and how best to describe them in a patent application. So this slide goes to some of the initial criteria for patentability, which are that something is considered patentable subject matter, or at least it's not unpatentable subject matter, and that it's new, useful, and non-obvious in view of the prior art. Generally, inventors are aware of the industry they're operating in, so they know what's new and almost everything they do is useful. So the question is really to make sure that the way that an invention is described in a patent application will make clear that it is not unpatentable in the sense that it's not abstract or directed to mental steps, and that it's non-obvious. Non-obviousness generally means that something is the result of more than just good, straightforward engineering and the application of known techniques in the known way. So some of the questions a patent attorney should ask you have to deal with: what did you do that was counterintuitive? What took the most effort? What required that you take a different perspective on either the technical problem or the way it might be used? Because all of that can be a clue as to how to present your invention most effectively in a patent application. The bottom part of this slide goes to the requirements on the application contents, enablement and written description. It's very important, even when filing a provisional patent application, that the application have the sufficient breadth and depth of information so that it can serve as the foundation later for the types of claims you want. And so this is something that's overlooked a lot when people write their own applications, and even with a lot of patent attorneys. The attorney needs to work with you to get the details needed to understand what you did, how you did it, and to describe that effectively to the reader. This next slide really goes to the key points of my talk, and the first one is probably the most important one. That is IP, intellectual property, which includes patents, copyrights, trade secrets, know-how, trademarks. It's a business asset. You have to use the proper procedure to identify it and convert it into an asset. But once it is in the form of an asset, it's something that can help to protect and increase corporate value. There are indirect and direct benefits of having these types of assets. For instance, having a properly prepared patent portfolio may deter someone from suing you. It may encourage them to invest in your company. It may encourage them to engage in various types of business relationships with you. So it's not just the idea of getting applications on file, it's having applications written in a certain way and that are designed to achieve a certain purpose. The bottom point on this slide has only more recently become important, and that is that boards of directors and executives have a fiduciary duty to maximize the value of the intellectual property of their company. In some cases, this may not matter much if there is not anything new and creative that your company is doing. But if it is, you really want to make sure you at least explore this issue so that you can say you've satisfied these duties. And there's a slide I'll show later which has a little more detail on this and shows from the investor's perspective what type of due diligence might be necessary and what it might uncover. This slide summarizes some of what I've been saying. IP is a business asset. It has value as a form of property right, but it also sends a signal to the market that you're an innovator. It may help to attract and retain employees with certain skills. It gives you an ability to sit at the table in a sense and show that you have something of value that might be of value to others, so they might engage with you. You might have leverage over others because of it, which would give you an advantage if they are opposed to something you're trying to do. The other thing is that, particularly with patents, you have to be able to get the patent based on not having disclosed it or commercialized it more than a year before you applied for a patent. So what this really means is you need to engage with a patent attorney early on in the process of product development and before you commercialize or publicly disclose aspects of the invention. So you need to help with identifying what those potentially patentable innovations are, and you need to take steps to protect them at the proper time. This slide discusses some situations where having a properly developed intellectual property portfolio is of value, and they really come down to two categories. One is risk management, and that is to allow you to address a risk from a third party by deterring litigation, by deterring their entry into the market, by preparing for an expected dispute so that you have some leverage over them in the proper situation. And the other is as an asset. The patent process really creates a business asset, and it allows you to have what I would call a stack of chips at the table. You would not attend a poker game without being able to buy in and have sufficient chips to give you opportunities in the game. Same with a patent portfolio. You need to develop it along certain lines. You need to construct your applications in a certain way. And then you have the ability to do these things that are listed. You may want to contribute it to a joint development project. You may want to develop assets that are the result of a directed R&D program to solve key problems in the industry. You may want to do it to develop assets that can be used to counter the actions of an expected competitor. And you may want to do it just to develop assets that increase the valuation of your company so that it is more attractive for investment or acquisition. This slide shows some of the interested parties who will want to see what type of patent portfolio or IP portfolio you have. You can see there's a range of them, both external and internal. The internal ones want to make sure that you're maximizing the value of the creative solutions to technical problems that your engineers and employees come up with. But some of the external ones want to make sure that you're fulfilling your fiduciary duties and you're maximizing the value of your corporate assets. And because IP is one of these assets, it's really important to identify what is protectable and to take the right steps to protect it. This slide is one I mentioned earlier, and this really shows the whole process from a different perspective. This is the external perspective that an investor or a VC or shareholder might look, and they want to see what has been done within the company to develop its IP portfolio. But this also gives clues as to how effective executives have been at building an innovation culture and at capturing and developing ideas into an asset. So this is something that VCs often do and that I'm asked to help with, which is to look from the outside at what a company has done to develop its own IP portfolio and how effective its executives have been at setting up procedures to stimulate innovation, capture innovations, decide which to protect, and then how best to protect them. These are all things you want to keep in mind and you want to speak to a patent attorney about early on in the process, because as I said, there are some deadlines that can prevent you from seeking patent protection either in the US and or foreign countries, and you want to make sure you don't run afoul of any of those. So now let's get down to some of the more detailed aspects of developing a patent strategy. This slide shows some of the motivations for developing it. As I said, that's building a patent, a corporate asset, and also developing a tool for managing risk. The bottom part of the slide shows some of the functions that need to be implemented, or at least that you need to be aware of and speak with a patent attorney about. You need to find ways to stimulate and capture innovations. A lot of these things you will develop as your company gets larger, but you want to be aware of their importance. That is, the infrastructure to enable engineers and employees to submit ideas for consideration, to identify products in which they have developed a unique or creative solution to a technical problem. A rewards or recognition program is always helpful because people want to know that they've done something that's recognized as being of value. In deciding what to protect, I usually start with drivers of revenue, something that will differentiate you in the marketplace, something that will build your brand. So we want to look at those things first. We also want to look at other ideas that for some reason you believe are just new and creative solutions to technical problems that were encountered in providing a product or service. As I mentioned, ideally you want to do this prior to commercialization or public disclosure of details about the invention. This might mean after you produce a piece of software that provides a service or a new way of doing something, but before you make it go live on a platform, before you offer it for sale, before you market it as being available for sale. And there's some techniques that can be done that will allow you to do detailed beta testing without this problem. But again, you need to speak to a patent attorney about them to show that you do this in the correct way. For some innovations, you'll want to consider trade secret or copyright protection. For others, trademark or other forms of brand development may be useful. And again, here's a case where sometimes I've been involved in product development and I've assisted clients to figure out not only a desirable product feature, but how to describe it and develop it in ways that will increase its chance of being patentable. You want to have a filtering criteria, and I'll get into this in a moment about some of the factors to consider when deciding which innovations are the ones that you should move forward with seeking protection on. And then once you've done that, you want to protect them in ways that maximize the value of a patent application for later times. The reason for this is that patent applications can take 2 to 3 years to be examined and result in issued patents. You want to make sure that the information in them is as complete and thorough as is known when you file the application, so that you have the chance of using the applications as a foundation for protecting not just what you did, but some alternatives to what you did, some different perspectives on it, that is perhaps end user, server platform, provider of software. You want all of this to be supported in the application so that as it's getting through the patent office, you will have opportunities to expand the coverage or to make it more valuable depending on how you see the business developing. And there are unique processes you can put in place to do all of these functions. And that's one of the things that I help clients do. So this slide emphasizes that the effective strategy is dynamic over time, it's multi-factor and multi-step. And in fact, the decision process is used as to whether to file on something, whether to keep an application pending in view of an office action from a patent examiner, and how to use these assets are really dependent on the state of the company. The decision process you use may vary over time, and the information you use in the decision process may vary over time. So it's important to realize that even after you file an application, there are decisions to be made, and you need to work very closely with your patent attorney so they have the information to assist you in making those decisions. I mentioned there are certain sources of data that might be involved in making decisions about what to file and whether to keep an application pending. This slide just gives a quick summary of those. You can see some of them are internal and some are external. So it's important to develop a relationship with your patent attorney so that you exchange this kind of information and they know when you're looking to enter a new market, when you've spotted a new competitive company, because there are steps that can be taken sometimes to increase the value and the usefulness of a patent portfolio in those cases. This slide goes to some of the examples of how to implement the strategy. It's important to have regular brainstorming or regular product or service reviews. This depends on the cadence of your company and how often they're doing software updates, but it's important to at least integrate the identification of potential innovations into the product development cycle. And there are ways to do that that are very effective and do not create much of a burden on the employees. You want to have applications prepared in a way which serve as a foundation for multiple uses later. This involves taking different perspectives, looking at variations on how you might implement it or use it, and you want all that information into your initial applications. Then internally, you want to be looking at identifying opportunities to use patents or applications or other parts of your IP portfolio. And that involves this communication with the patent attorney about competitors, new markets, product roadmap, products and services that have not yet been released or even fully developed, as long as you can explain how you would go about implementing them. This shows an example timeline. As I mentioned, it's important to get started early, preferably before public disclosure or any commercialization. You want to consult a patent agent or patent attorney and discuss what you've done. Let them help you identify potentially patentable aspects and then decide how to protect them and do that in a certain form. A provisional application has a lifetime of 1 year, after which it automatically expires. So before that time, you want to convert that into a non-provisional, which is the version that's actually examined. And again, you want to include in it a description of not only what you've done, but multiple perspectives of looking at it, other ways of using the solution, and even other use cases in other industries. I mentioned that there are criteria to use on deciding which ideas or solutions you want to protect. This gives an example of some of the criteria. You have to look at what would be the value of having a patent that covered a particular type of solution. How easy is it to detect infringement? What's the likelihood of obtaining it? And then do you have filing bias, which means if you have a small portfolio or none, then the bias is probably shifted towards filing. Later times you might be more reluctant to file on. But it's important to consider these different criteria in sorting through the possible candidates for protection and figuring out which are the ones you should prioritize right now. So the last couple slides are on protecting software and AI and machine learning inventions. These issues apply to all inventions, but they can be particularly difficult for software and AI. And it just means that you need to be aware of these, you need to discuss them with your patent attorney, and you need to find ways to describe the invention that will minimize the risk of an examiner having a successful objection or rejection to the claims in your patent. And there are techniques for this. They generally involve embedding the actual algorithm or solution you've come up with in a somewhat broader and more specific method or process, so that you want to protect it by saying that it's part of a larger process for making a decision or solving a particular problem in a particular use case. And you also want to mention things about viewed from a different perspective. It might be considered patentable and non-obvious. And one way to do that is to simply say what prior art has done and why those have disadvantages, and then just to use some of the arguments for why what you've done is a creative and new solution, and use those when communicating with the patent examiner. This slide goes to the requirements for what you described in the application. Again, it needs to be sufficient to enable someone to practice the invention, and you want to make sure you fulfill the written description requirement for other ideas or other use cases. And again, your patent attorney should be asking you questions about this and helping you to get the information that will be put into the application. This one just goes to the obviousness or non-obviousness issue. Again, examiner may claim that you're using machine learning simply to replace a different technique for solving a problem. And so the description of in the application must show you're really doing more than that. That is, you've identified the specific type of input data needed, you've identified what the model will be trained to do, and then you're using that to make a particular decision. This is the final slide, as we're running out of time, but this slide basically shows some of the types of services that an experienced patent attorney can provide. Most companies will need most of these as they go through their development and growth. And it's just important that you realize these are all the things that the patent attorney can assist you to do, and you need to recognize when you might need help with them so that you go to them and that you engage in a conversation about these issues. So let me pause there and see if there's any questions I can answer. Please remember, I did provide my email address. You can feel free to contact me regarding more details or any of the topics I've discussed.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you so much for your insight. So we don't have any Q&A for you specifically. So I figure you answered everything.
Well, thank you. And again, just feel free to contact me using the email if you want to discuss any of the details about what's in the slides.
Other thing I want to mention here to all the attendees is the speakers' contact information is also on our event website. So there is their LinkedIn, and some of them has Twitter. So you can also, connect with them. And right after this session at 12:45, we have sessions with all the speakers, mentoring sessions, and we posted in the chat. So the Zoom meeting link, so you can join there and, network with the speakers and ask specific questions there. So regarding the inquiry of Krishnan Raman about the recordings, we will send the recordings after the conference will be over, because we need some time to, gather it and then send it to every attendee, but we will be doing that. Thank you, Alan. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much to all the attendees.
So this is the announcement for all the attendees that we have mentoring